Hey guys, how are you guys doing? Hope everybody's okay. I'm gonna do this video on how far my car was able to drive with a damaged, broken transmission. And this is info you can't get from your normal mechanic because they're not gonna know. This is from like experience, my own personal experience of how far you can drive your car with a broken transmission that needs to be replaced. So if you guys watch my videos, you guys know that I'm on my second transmission right now, and currently I have like close to 80,000 miles on my current transmission. So my first transmission, the original transmission that came with this car, as far as I know, when I bought this car at 150,000 miles, I drove that car for 50,000 miles before the transmission broke, had really loud CVT whines up until the transmission broke, and after it broke, and when I was driving it, it still whined. Obviously, it still whined. So the story goes like this. I was driving it on the freeway to upstate New York from where I am, and it's a 2-hour ride up and a 2-hour ride back, so it's a 4-hour trip. So driving to the destination was fine, and I believe it was a spring day. It wasn't over the summer, it was a spring day. So I'm taking a 2-hour trip on the freeway. Most of it is on the freeway to upstate New York. And on the way back, I had issues with the transmission. So I was going probably like close to 60, 70, 80 miles per hour going to upstate, and then doing the same thing going back home. And when I was coming back home, sometime during that drive, my transmission wouldn't shift. I mean, I was going maybe like 70 miles per hour, 65 or whatever, and at some point I had my foot close to all the way down the pedal, and I noticed that it wasn't going faster. It was going like 60 miles per hour or something like that, 60, 50, whatever. It was decelerating. So I never had, funny enough, with all the whines and all that stuff, with the original transmission, I never had it go to safe mode. I never had that issue. And I've never had the issue where my car started decelerating. So first thing I did when I noticed that, I was like halfway home. So I was probably like 100 miles from where I was, and it started decelerating. And so what I did was I started worrying, obviously. I think I was probably like in the middle lane or whatever. You know, first thing that comes to your mind when that happens is, I'm screwed. All right, I'm gonna have to get a tow. And I was all right with it because I have AAA's premium membership, so I was all right with that tow. But it's just a headache of waiting an hour or two for a tow truck and all that stuff. You guys know about that. Everybody knows about that who's actually been in these kind of situations where the cars had issues. So what I did was, when that situation came up where it wouldn't shift on its own, so guess what? It wouldn't shift on its own. So what I did was I used this. This is the first time ever that I've actually used this to upshift the downshift, because when I first bought this car, everybody told me, when I asked what this was, they didn't know what the hell that was. They were like, don't do that, or they suggested I don't do that, I don't use it, I wouldn't have to use it. And you know, obviously I was always concerned about using this, that I actually never used it until I needed to. So when my car wouldn't accelerate any faster than like 50 miles per hour, what I did was I had no choice, and I started using this Upshift Downshift. And funny enough, it was able to upshift downshift. I mean, it drove kind of smooth meaning that I really didn't have any issue. and I drove like that for 50 miles, got off the ramp, was really worried. I was able to still drive it, and it started having issues somewhat with going into limp mode. I got off the ramp. Obviously, I went out, checked a couple of things. Didn't know what the situation was at the time. I checked a couple of things. I checked my transmission fluid, and the green fluid that was in there from when I bought this car at 150,000 miles to 200,000 miles was black. And at that point, I knew my transmission had issues. I knew at that point my transmission had issues, and I was screwed, and I was going to pay money to get another transmission put into this car. So, but the story is, I was still able to drive back home doing this, upshift and downshift on this. I was able to do it. I was able to upshift and downshift on this and drove all the way home without any kind of issues with my transmission. Well, obviously I still had issues with my transmission, because on that drive, every now and then the car would get into safe mode. I'd have to get off the ramp, wait about 15-20 minutes, and then get back on the freeways, drove it all the way home. So I was like, okay, so this works, right? This thing works right here. You know, it works. It works. It actually works where, you know, the automatic transmission is not shifting into gear, so I actually could use the upshift downshift portion of this, the manual upshift downshift, to actually drive my car. So I'm like, maybe this won't be too bad. I mean, if I could actually drive my car like that, I'd be fine with it. I really didn't want a headache of going to, you know, you know, finding out how much it would cost to get, you know, another CVT transmission put into my car. I really did not want that headache, and I didn't want to pay money for it at the time. So I drove it. I kid you not, I drove it for a couple of days like that, crossing my fingers, hoping that I could just drive like that without any kind of issues. I was hoping that I could actually just drive like that for a long while, which I was okay with doing. All right, I had no problems if I could, you know, if I could actually manually shift it from gear to gear. I'd be like, all right, you know, not a problem. You know, I don't want to go the hassle of paying, you know, more money on a brand new transmission. Not that I'm a cheap ass, but you know, this car has crossed 200,000 miles. Well, yeah, at the point it was like 200,000 miles. So I mean, I'm sorry. I like this car, but you know, 200,000 miles in the car, you know, it wasn't like I was trying to baby or anything like that, which is kind of sad. Because this car's been decent, except for the CVT transmission, which I had to do a lot of research on. And had I known, you know, that you needed to change the transmission fluid every 30 to 60,000 miles, I don't think it would have broken down on me if I had changed it. Probably not. I don't know. But okay, so the story goes like this. I drove it the next day like that, from place to place, shopping or whatever, and I had no issues. Well, I had no, as far as I can remember, this was like 100,000 miles ago, or 80,000 miles ago. And as far as I can remember, I had a couple issues where, you know, obviously the whine, you can still hear the whine. And as far as shifting it up and down, you know, it wasn't a smooth ride, but it got me from place to place. So I was like, maybe I could just do this for a long while. So like 3 days later, I was like, okay, I was going somewhere, and the transmission got worse. Obviously, obviously the transmission got worse. So I'm like driving it on the. I believe I was still driving on the freeways. I think got off the freeways, got on the regular roads. At some point, the transmission just totally broke down. It went from being bad to being just almost just non-usable. Funny enough, I could still drive it. It was still drivable. It was still going, all right, but it was going very, very slow, and every couple of miles or whatever, I would have it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work to the point where every couple of miles it would just, I would put my foot on the accelerator. There'll be like the RPMs will go up. There'll be some noise, a whining noise, and it just won't go anywhere. So at that point, I knew it was done. It was done. Well, I knew it was done. Like on that day, I knew it was done when it started acting up worse than it normally than a couple of days ago. I knew the transmission was done. So I parked my car, waited 20, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, drove it a little bit more. I was trying to get home. Parked it, drove it a little bit more, trying to get home, and at some point, it was so bad as far as shifting into gear that I had to consider. I was close to where I was, maybe like 5 or 6 miles close to where my home was before it just didn't work anymore. Kind of didn't work anymore. I would say kind of didn't work anymore, because I would have my foot on the accelerator and it would start limping, and at some point it wouldn't move at all. It wouldn't shift at all. I was using the manual manual, and it wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't do anything at all. So what happens after that? So I parked my car. I'm like, all right, let me see if I need to, let me see if I could call a tow truck or something to get a tow or whatever. And it was kind of late in the day, and for whatever reason, I don't know, whatever reason it was, I decided to actually just drive it. I'd have to park it for like every 15 minutes. I'd have to park it and let it cool down, and then I would shift it into gear, and it would still move. It'd go slow, and I was on local streets. I made sure to be on local streets, and it still moved. And let's just say I was able to get it back home. As I recall, I was still able to get it back home with it being like 90% broken. I was still able to drive it back home. It was limping, couldn't go, after a certain MPG, MPG. After a certain point, it just limped for a little while. It just limped for like a couple of blocks to, maybe like 5 or 6 blocks, and then I'd have to park it, spend another 15 minutes or whatever, wait for it to cool down, and then I'd have to start my car again, put it and use the manual to upshift it. It would go for another 5 blocks. I did it, and I drove it that way up until the point where I parked the car at where I lived, and funny enough, I was able to drive it from where I was back home, even with a broken CVT transmission. So this video is, if your CVT transmission physically breaks down, you can still drive it. Seriously, if your CVT transmission is broken, meaning that you have to manually shift it to get it to go up or down, and your transmission fluid turns black, and you know for a fact that it physically broke and you need to change the transmission, or your car is just, that transmission just won't work anymore. Funny enough, it will limp. It will limp for I don't know how long. All right, I would limp for it limped for 6 miles, 6 or 7 miles back to where